Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadet First Class William DeRubio. It is my privilege to welcome you to this 29th Annual National Character and Leadership Symposium speaker session, Leading in Combat. Our honored guest speaker for this afternoon session is Brigadier General Michael R. Drowley. Brigadier General Michael Johnny Bravo Drowley is Commander, 57th Wing, Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. He is responsible for 36 squadrons at 12 installations, constituting the Air Force's most diverse flying wing. General Drowley oversees the United States Air Force Weapons School, Advanced Maintenance and Munitions Operations School, the Thunderbirds, Red Flag and Green Flag exercises, and the Air Force Aggressors. General Drowley is a 1996 graduate from the United States Air Force Academy and a command pilot with over 2,400 fighter hours in the A-10 Thunderbolt II, including over 200 combat hours. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present to you Brigadier General Michael Drowley.
Well, thank you very much for the intro, and very humbled to have this experience to talk to everybody. I know there's probably a lot of emotion in the crowd and a lot of different thoughts as we look at the events that are going on in the world. And I apologize I couldn't be there today in person because of that situation. But when you look at it, this does provide us an opportunity to sit down and reflect on the profession, on our character, on our leadership, and really why we're about to join, why you are about to join into this service. And so I'm glad that we have this opportunity and I get to provide some perspective into that. And for context, that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. I had a commander who used to, as he'd walk around and see the airmen and see the troops that he was working with, ask the question, when did you join the Air Force? And so it sounds like a pretty benign question, one pretty easy to answer, especially for us. The day you graduate from the academy will be seared into your memory. And so if you were asking me, hey, when did you join the Air Force? I'd answer 29 May, 1996. But then the response you get is a little bit out of the ordinary, where he would then come back to you and say, no, that's not when you joined. So then you do some thinking. It was like, well, maybe he's talking about the day that I showed up to the academy, which again, that one's pretty burned into my memory. I went to the prep school and I showed up on my birthday. So the answer would 31 July, 1991. And then you get the same response. No, that's not when you joined the Air Force. And so the point was, and what he'd come along to in the discussion was, there's a day while you were serving where you decided that the Air Force was you. And it's not the day that you entered the service. It's a day where you looked down and said, hey, I just joined the Air Force. Like, this is the institution that I want to be a part of. I embrace the values, I embrace the principles, and now this is a part of me. So I thought it was an interesting premise, an interesting theory. And so being an introspective kind of person, I started to think about it. And I was like, well, geez, so when did I join the Air Force? And there's over a 26-year career that I've had, there's a number of days where that could apply. Definitely the day, again, you graduate from the academy is extremely meaningful. I went to pilot training. The day I got my wings resonated a lot with me. That was important. The day I got checked out in the A-10 was incredibly meaningful. Went to the weapons school. That meant a lot. Then off to combat, started combat operations in Afghanistan, some of the first A-10s in the Bagram Air Base. Got to support our troops over there by ensuring they were protected by close air support. Went into Operation Iraqi Freedom, led some of the first strike packages into that conflict, was the mission commander for the rescue of PFC Jessica Lynch. And then after that, got to come out here to the weapons school as an instructor, got to pass the things that I learned on to others and watch those graduates put a patch on their shoulder and then go forth and lead our team into combat as we continue to serve overseas. So that meant quite a bit to me. I got to be an AOC at the academy, learn about leadership, get to see my cadets walk across the stage, throw their hats in the air, and then go forth and be officers. Again, extremely meaningful when you look at our service in the Air Force. I've gotten to command as a squadron commander, as the commandant of the weapons school. And so there was a number of times where I look back and go, wow, was that the day that I joined the Air Force? There was one particular day that really strikes me, and it actually just happened pretty recently. I had finished up my tours, commandant of the weapons school here at Nellis Air Force Base, and was selected to be the chief of staff for Air Force's Central Command, working for Lieutenant General at the time, Regan, over in Al Udeid Air Base. And so this was the command structure that was really overseeing Operation Inherent Resolve, and then Operation Freedom Sentinel and Resolute Support for our combat operations in Syria, Iraq against ISIS, and then also Afghanistan. So 1 year deployment. And so over there, I'd be about the third or fourth person kind of in charge of this entire operation, where we are making sure that the airmen and the joint and the coalition partners that we serve with get everything that they need so that way they can support the objectives that we have. So I show up to Qatar over in Al Udeid Air Base for my 1-year deployment. And I'd been over there for a few weeks, and Lieutenant General Nahom, who was Major General Nahom at the time, was the deputy CFAC, the deputy commander. And one day we're talking, he's like, you're still current and qualified in the A-10. You should ask General Regan if you can fly combat missions while you're over here. It would provide great perspective and great insight to how we are supporting the team and what we can do to help them out. And so General Regan, who's now the commander over in United States Air Force's Europe, one of the most superb leaders I've had the opportunity to work for. He is empathetic. He is a combat leader. He's no nonsense. Also an Academy graduate, a member of the Wings of Blue while he was a cadet. And so just a phenomenal leader. And so I walked in to plead my case and said, hey, sir, I'm still qualified to fly A-10 missions. And I think I would be able to provide a good perspective on how operations are going over here. And after we had a discussion about it, he really laid out the ground rules for me. He was like, okay, you can do this, but this is not your primary job. Your primary job is to be the chief of staff and to ensure that we are doing the things that we need to do. And the last thing that I want to see is for you to go out, fly A-10 missions, and then get stranded somewhere, or that becomes your primary responsibility at that point. If you go out and fly those missions, you go out and you fly them, and then you come back and it's right to work. And so for the first 6 months I was over there, I got to participate in combat missions in Operation Inherent Resolve in Iraq and over Syria. And then after that, the A-10s transitioned to Afghanistan. And so I was making my trip out to Kandahar. It was one of the last times in my 12-month deployment that I was going to go out and fly a combat sortie. And up until that point, I had been 100%. I had been able to get to where I needed to go. I'd go fly my combat missions for a couple of days, and then I would come back and I'd have a after action report and say, here's all the things that I learned. Here's things that we can do to help the team out. I hadn't been late. I hadn't missed any responsibilities. And so I had a pretty good traffic record going. So I got out to Kandahar. We get our taskings for the missions that I'm going to help support. And there's a special operations outpost that's in the Tarankat area. And they had been receiving indirect fire, direct fire from several mortar positions, harassing fire from enemy positions. And so we were tasked to support that. And so during the sortie that I was flying, we identified where several of those positions were, employed and serviced those targets, successfully did it and helped affect the battlefield, support the troops on the ground. And I remember flying back and thinking to myself, that could have been my last combat sortie. I'm a colonel in the Air Force. Those opportunities at this level are pretty fleeting as it begins, and they're probably even more fleeting as I continue on. And so I remember thinking to myself, like, I did it. I supported the mission that I came over here to support. I got these experiences, and what an amazing opportunity that I was afforded to be able to do this. But once I got wheels on the deck, I really started to focus on the next threat, which is like, I want to keep my track record in place here, and I need to get back and make sure that I don't miss, this opportunity that I was provided and get back to my primary responsibility, which is being the chief of staff at AFCENT. So one of the things while you're over in the area of operations that we may be supporting is it's not like there's a given flight schedule. There's flights that are always kind of coming and going, delivering supplies or doing troop movements and those kind of things. And it's not like you've got a Southwest schedule that you can pull up and say, here's where I'm going to hop on. There is a schedule, but it's fairly dynamic based off of everything that's going on. So I checked in with base operations, and they're like, there just so happens to be a C-17 going back to Al Udeid. It's going to show up here in about 5 or 6 hours. You can hop on, and it's a one-shot trip all the way back. And I thought, my luck is just doing outstanding here. Well, so as I'm sitting in base operations waiting for the flight to show up, a C-17 lands, and they're like, hey, that's actually the flight we were talking about. I don't know why it's here early. And so I make my way out to the C-17 because I want to meet the crew, and I love learning about aerial events and what it is that we do as a profession. And so I always try and take the opportunity to talk to the team and again see where I can learn. Most of the time I'm greeted at the aircraft. Everybody kind of gives me an overview of what the mission is that they're doing, how their deployment is going, areas that maybe I can help out. But this crew was pretty focused on the task at hand that they had. And so I noticed they were very much in the books. They were very much in the checklist. They were reviewing the information for the tasking that they'd received. And on the back end of the C-17, there's just tonnage of equipment that's getting loaded up. Heavy loaders, heavy excavation equipment, multiple special operations troops that are getting on board, to the point where, I mean, I've been around mobility operations before. I'd never seen quite this amount of stuff getting loaded onto the aircraft. And so I finally make my way up to the crew and I'm like, hey, guys, I'm Colonel Drowley. I'm catching a ride with you back to LUD. And I noticed they are very, again, immersed into the task of going through their checklist and running numbers. And so finally, one of them turns around. It's a first lieutenant and a brand new captain who are the pilot and the co-pilot of the aircraft and the mission commander and co-mission commander. And he turns around and he's like, actually, we're not going to LUD right off the bat. We've got a primary mission that we're doing first. Then we come back here. Then we get fuel. And then we go back to LUD. So, we should be back in about 3 or 4 hours, which marries up with the timeline that they originally told me. So, again, I love learning about the mission. I love learning about what it is that we do. And so I asked, I was like, well, I can be with you on this first mission. And then that way I'm always with the aircraft. You come back here, you get fuel. I'm here already. And then we can go back. Both of them kind of did the Mueller stuff and like, sir, I don't really recommend it, and I'm like, no, I'm fine. I would love to see what the mission is that you guys are executing. The lesson learned that I took away with this is if a young, expert captain, lieutenant tells you it's not a good idea for you to stay on board, it's probably not a good idea for you to stay on board. So as I'm watching this equipment get loaded up, there's a crusty senior master sergeant in the back that's the load master who's helping all this equipment get into place and make sure the center of gravity and the weight and balance is correct. And so I asked him, I was just like, this seems like a lot of equipment that we're putting on. Have you ever loaded this much? He's like, never. This is the first time I've ever seen this much equipment. He's like, we're authorized, it's capable. He's like, but we just got a lot of stuff that we're putting in. And so I asked, I go, well, where are we delivering all this? And he's like, well, Terran Cout. I'm like, oh, wow, I just kind of bombed around that place. And that's where I had the second indicator of maybe I should reconsider the choice that I'm making, which is hopping on board this mission. So anyway, we get loaded up, everything is certified and good to go. And we take off and the sun is now set, it's nighttime, and we go to do this delivery into this outpost so they can get the things that they need to make sure their defenses are built up and it's good to go. So we're in our holding pattern. There's A-10s, the ones that I just flew with, that are there to support and make sure the area is sanitized. And as we get ready to make our final approach into the outpost, the mortar fire that we had serviced earlier is popping up in other places now. There's more indirect and direct fire going into the outpost. The A-10s go off to try and service that as the C-17 gets ready to make its approach. And so as we're on this approach, it's a dark night, we're heavyweight. It means that you have to keep the power up to try and stay on the glide path that you're trying to follow into the airfield. I start seeing tracer fire come up towards the aircraft and anti-artillery fire coming up towards the aircraft, which I've seen before, but now granted, I was in an A-10, heavily armored, can take a beating, highly maneuverable, never in a heavyweight on descent into the airfield C-17. Now, because I had experienced fire before, as soon as I see it, I was like, we're getting shot at. That's AAA. The pilots that I was flying with had not been shot at before. So this was their first time seeing it, and they're under night vision goggles. And so I'm using the naked eye to see it, and I can see the individual tracer fire coming up. The first time you're shot at when you have night vision goggles on, it almost has a flashing effect, and that's kind of what it looks like. And so my pilot and co-pilot, as they start seeing some of the fire go up, kind of look to each other and go, wow, is it raining? It looks like there's lightning out. To clear up all confusion of what's going on in the cockpit, that senior master sergeant who was loading things up comes running up to the cockpit and just screams at the top of his lungs, we're taking fire. And sure enough, now the volume of fire is increasing to the point where I'm sitting in what's called the rear position seat of the aircraft, which is right behind the pilot. And as I'm watching the fire come up, I'm doing an insidious lean back. Like that's going to save my life. Like the AAA and the rounds that are flying up, the 6 inches that I would have leaned back is going to save me from getting hit. And there was a good volume of fire coming from all directions, from in front of the aircraft, from the side of the aircraft, as we go to make our final approach. When you're in that situation, they have a decision to make. They can break it off and then go around, but most of the time you commit to the landing. That's the safest and the most tactical thing that you do. And so that's what we executed that day. And so the team did an amazing job. Poor conditions as far as the illumination goes. We're taking fire. The weather was actually degrading. They're heavyweight. They're going into an austere airfield, and they put the aircraft on the ground. And then now they're trying to taxi around while the outpost is under fire so they can deliver the cargo that they need to deliver. Much like when you're in these situations, the adrenaline dump happens, and now you realize that you just kind of flirted with disaster and death and survived. And the pilot and co-pilot, are laughing. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe we made it through that." And from the backseat, I'm like, "Hey, I'm pretty sure you guys got hit." which they were like, no, all systems are functional. All the gauges are in the green and where they're supposed to be. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure we probably took some rounds. So as we make her stop, the co-pilot gets out of the aircraft, does a quick inspection, comes back in and goes, no, everything looks good. And so now it's time to depart. And so the C-17 is now lightweight, and their tactic to get out of the airfield is to do a rapid climb and try and get up into altitude away from the environment where you're getting shot at. So as we do that, we run up the power, we depart the airfield, we take off at a high velocity and with a vector to try and get away from the ground. And as soon as we do that, every caution warning indicator light in the cockpit starts going off. We're losing electrical systems, we're losing hydraulic systems, because sure enough, we did get hit. As it turns out, we took about 6 rounds across the belly of the aircraft. The crew, again, does an amazing job. They get us pointed back to Kandahar, which is where we started from. They're staying underneath the weather, which is degrading. And then they're able to get us in with like minimal navigational equipment, because a lot of the damage that occurred, hydraulic systems that were failing, and then we land on Kandahar and we get to a safe stop. I'm able to congratulate the crew and say, hey, you guys did an amazing job there, but I've got to get back to my base, because again, I've got a tasking where I got to make sure that I get back, but you guys did incredible. And now I start trying to figure out where my next ride is. It turns out that in the earlier support that we provided that outpost, there was a special operator that was wounded, and there was an H-860 about to make its way to another air base, so that way they could start getting medical support, and it was leaving. And they told me, hey, from there, you can then catch another aircraft to get you back to LUD. And so I hop on this helicopter. Now the weather is significantly degrading. And I'm talking to the crew, which again is 2 young captains that are piloting this. And we've got our guardian angels and pararescue men that are providing medical support to the special operator who'd been injured. And they're trying to make the determination whether they can take off in the weather as it looks, because of it's degrading and we're in a mountainous area. And not even with looking at me, which I'm again kind of baggage in the jump seat at this point. They're like, hey sir, we're pressing with this. We got to get him some help. And I'm like, you got it. I'm once again along for the ride. And I get to watch this crew navigate these mountains with their night vision goggles on, work their way through the weather, get to the airfield that they need to get to. And once they get there, they transload the injured special operator to a medical support C-130, where he'll get the care that he needs to and get to a more enduring hospital location. So it just so happens that the aircraft that I'm hopping on there is another C-17. So I get on that one, and what's going on is what's called the relief in place or transfer of authority for the Army. So what you have is you have brand spanking new troops that are getting off the aircraft, and then Army members who had been there for about 12 to 14 months, dirty, just been in the thick of things for quite a while, that are now getting on to go back home. And I'm watching that, and as I go up again to meet the crew, it's again a young lieutenant and a young captain who are trying to figure out, what they need to do to manifest everybody to get them back. And so we get everybody loaded up, we start making our way, and this is the airplane that's going to finally get me back to LUD. So this has been going on now for about 36 to 40 hours from the time where I was like, I'm going to try and make my way back to the base that I need to get to. And I remember as we make our final approach into LUD, the sun is coming up, the C17 lands, the Army personnel get off board. I say goodbye to the crew that I got to fly over with. Another crew's walking up, again, another captain and a lieutenant. The lieutenant's got a red, white, and blue headband on and Elvis glasses to do his pre-flight in the of the C-17. And I remember sitting there looking at these young airmen who are just jobbing it over there and getting it done and finding different ways to make the mission happen. And they come up to me and ask if I need a ride back to my quarters to where I'm staying. And I'm like, you know what, I'm fine. I'm just going to stay here for just a second. And I remember thinking to myself, I think I just joined the Air Force, which sounds weird, after 22 years of serving and doing all the things that I got to do. Like that would have been the day and a half where that happens. And so when I reflected back on that commander that would ask, when did you join the Air Force? I think I've got a different theory than the one that he came up with. And that theory is you're going to join several times. You're going to join and you're going to leave, and you're going to join and you're going to leave, and you're going to join and you're going to leave. And that process is going to happen over and over and over again. And what I'd ask you is, I hope that your joins outnumber your leaves, because we need you. When you look at the challenges that are on the horizon, and when you look at the leadership that we need you to join. And we need you to take care of the airmen that you're in charge of and ensure they join more times than they leave. And so that's why these events and these opportunities to sit down and reflect are so meaningful, because it gives us the opportunity to think about the profession that we're in, what it is that we're about to go do, how we can do it better. So that way you can look back and all the experiences that you've had and know those are the times that I joined the Air Force. And so I'm really appreciative of the fact that I get to be here and talk with you today and share some of those experiences with you. I'm very much looking forward to your questions and see what kind of perspective I can provide. And just more so than anything else, I appreciate the service that you guys have already given and the sacrifices you've already made and those ones you're going to go forward and make as well.
General Drowley, thank you so much for your message this afternoon. We're now about to transition into the question and answer portion of the session. Our audience, either in F1 or virtually over Zoom, may type questions into the discussion board aligned with this virtual session on the NCLS event platform. I will then take those questions and relay them to Brigadier General Drowley. Sir, I'll start off with one as those questions begin to populate. So this year's theme for NCLS is ethics and respect for human dignity. As a leader, can you talk about one of those experiences that made you realize how important that is?
Yeah, so, as an overarching why it is so important, when you look at what we do again as a profession and how critical that is, for me, you want the tightest, most well-oiled team that you can possibly get. And if there's anything that detracts from that, if there's anything that takes away from that, it really impacts your ability to not only get the mission done, but take care of each other from a team aspect or team dynamic. And so that's why that ethical responsibility and that respect for human dignity is so critical. So that everybody that is part of that team or is part of the mission that you're executing has that sense of security or that area that they want to, that they know that they can operate in. And so from my standpoint, there's been, I would say, several different instances of where that has become important. And I think the biggest lesson learned that I've taken away from that is how do you create the environment to know that you can have interactions with an individual and the interactions that you're having are to help them be better, to help them get the job done that they need to get done. And you want to be as effective as possible. And they know that they can come to you in an open and secure environment and say, hey, this is what I'm going through. These are the things that I'm dealing with. And here's where I need help. And so that respect and that relationship that you have is what makes it critical. I would say that that is, to me, what I've always tried to search and find when I look for leadership discussions or leadership venues or leadership material that's out there is how can I better provide that close-knit dynamic and a culture that supports that. And so it's not just really one overarching example. I would say throughout a career, I've realized that is one of the most important aspects to team building and leadership that you can provide as a leader.
Thank you, sir. I have a question here from John. It's asking, what made you want to be an officer rather than an enlisted?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great question. When you look at how much education and leadership development our enlisted force has now, it really doesn't just blur the lines, but it really raises the entire, I would say, caliber of the force that we have overall. And the distinction, the historical distinction of, hey, officers are college educated and your enlisted force is, right out of high school has changed quite a bit to when you look at what the makeup of our force is today. So what really, I would say, resonated with me to be an officer is the responsibility that comes along with being an officer. And so I would say we are all leaders, all supervisors, all managers at different levels, no matter whether you're enlisted, NCO, airman, NCO, senior NCO, to officer, to general officer ranks. There's dynamics that are just baked into every aspect of what we do day in and day out. I would say the differentiation is the responsibility that comes along with that. And so that's really, I think, what meant a lot to me is not only the authority to make the decisions that I need to make, but the responsibility to own it. If it went poorly or if it went well, I knew that I was the responsible one. And that's really what comes with the officer position when you look at what it is that we're charged to do.
Very well said. Thank you, sir. I have a question here from Amy, who asks, you mentioned about joining and leaving and joining and leaving. What are some of the strategies that you have when, you feel like you're disengaged? How do you get that motivation to rejoin?
Yeah, well, part of it is kind of going back to what that purpose is, or what I call it, what your why is. And so when I look at like the reasons why I am still here doing what it is that I do, and like I said, it is perfectly healthy and normal to leave and to join and to leave and to join. That I try and go back to the thing that anchors me, and it's like, why do I do what it is that I do day in and day out? And for me, there's a few different reasons, but the primary one is I've had a number of experiences, a lot of those in combat. And I feel like I have a responsibility to now pay that forward and ensure this generation of leaders, this group that I'm talking to, is ready to take on those same challenges. I feel like I'm doing a disservice if I have that information, that knowledge, those experiences, and I just keep it to myself and I don't try and pass the lessons learned, the scar tissue that I've built up onto you. And so that's kind of reason number one for my why. Reason number two is on the family side. We've had to make a lot of sacrifice as well. My wife's a professional. She's an orthodontist. We've got 3 kids. And so I look at it as a primary responsibility of mine to say, how do I take the team that I have and develop them and give them back better than I have? How can I make things better for the next group? So that way, again, they are being developed, they are reaching their full potential. And so that is a primary responsibility of why I stay. And then the last one is, and like we talked about, there's a lot of challenges that are out on the strategic environment. I want to make sure that every single airman that I have the ability to impact is ready for whatever those challenges are. So that way they can look themselves in the mirror and they go, I am prepared for this, and I am ready to lead and get the mission done and take care of my people. And so I would encourage everybody to think about that and reflect on that, is like, hey, why am I doing this? What is my purpose in joining and being part of this profession? And that will usually bring you back to the reason why you joined, or bring you back to joining.
Thank you, sir. I have a question here from Christoph, who asks, when it seems like everything is going wrong in a situation, whether it be in combat or your football team is losing, how do you deal with composure? Keep yourself composed.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. And the lesson that I've learned from the combat sorties or the in extremis leadership situations that I've had is everybody is going to look to you and really reflect the demeanor, the composure, and how you conduct yourself. And so in those situations, when I feel like I'm getting nervous or I'm looking at the situation and I'm like, hey, this is not going well, that's me really thinking about myself at that point and not about the team. And so what allows me to help be able to lead in those situations is to not think about myself and to think about the others and go like, hey, the best way that I can help everybody else is to be cool, to be calm, to think 5 to 6 steps ahead of the rest of the group, because that is what I'm responsible for as a leader. As a leader, my job is to look 1 day, 10 days, 10 months, 10 years into the future and help us navigate our way to success. And so I can't do that if I'm thinking inwardly about how maybe I'm messing this up. Maybe I'm not doing a good job here. It's got to be part of the cross check. I got to look and go, okay, is there things I can do to improve? I just delivered that message. Do I need to say it again a different way? But it can't be what I'm completely really anchored on. I've got to think outside of myself and about the rest of the group. And that really helps me keep that composure. And so, I mean, it really even comes down to, as I'm flying combat missions or flying missions that are extremely stressful, where I'll think about, intrinsically, how do I slow down and lower the tone of my voice, just because that should hopefully keep everybody calm and executing and where they need to be. Because again, it's not about me, it's about them. And how do I help them out the most?
Definitely, sir. I have a question here from Marcus, who asks about, some of the red flags that you've either seen yourself or seen in others when it comes to when you're in that point where you begin to leave the organization per se. And if you don't mind sharing a couple of those, that way we can recognize those in ourselves.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, again, and it's healthy to think about those, or it's normal to go through those. I am cautious of anybody who's just like, you know what, I hate this, I don't want to be a part of it, it's terrible. Then I'm like, well, then you probably need to make a decision to transition or separate or retire. I'm just as cautious of somebody who's just like, I love this is great, it's awesome all the time. I'm just like, it's not, it's a lot of sacrifice. So to bounce between those two spectrums is okay. It's when you find somebody that is kind of permanently camped out in that red flag area that you talk about. and recognizing what those are. And a lot of times it can be that disengagement, not connecting with others, not focusing on what it is that we're trying to accomplish from a mission or team development standpoint. Or it could be just a disconnect from the things that we stand for as a service. And so when you see those, for me, I call them just check-ins. It's one of those like, hey, what's going on? How are you dealing with things? Or just an opportunity to talk, like, how you been doing, kind of thing, and providing that venue and again that space, just maybe to vent about something. And those things, and just being able to talk it out or knowing that somebody is there to listen, can hopefully steer you back to a place where you're like, okay, I'm doing okay, or you know what, I've now hit the point where this is no longer for me. And that's going to happen to all of us. It doesn't matter if it's at 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. At some point, you're going to have to transition and go ahead and do something else. But what I tell people is make that decision under your own power, and make it with a full embrace of like, I've done everything that I've wanted to do. I've served, I've left everything on the field, and now it's time for me to go transition and do that in a class act and in a professional manner.
Thank you, sir. I have a question from Olivia here, who's asking, being in the Air Force or being in any part of the military is a very stressful profession. How do you deal with that stress?
Yeah, that's a good one. There's, I would say, a few different ways in dealing with that stress when you look at what it is that we're asked to do and how we do it. The first one is being connected, and I call them touch points. When you look at the pandemic that we've been under and how it has forced us to, unfortunately, be somewhat disconnected or be somewhat more distributed. The biggest fear that I had is that we lose those touch points and the ability to connect, and just the opportunity to sit down with somebody and be able to talk or, banter about anything and see that gives you an opportunity to engage. It gives you the potential to be able to bring something out where you're like, hey, I'm going through something right now, and here's where I could use some help. And as weird as it sounds, it's not just for the person that may be going through that. That actually helps you as well, in relieving that stress, because you're like, hey, I'm helping this individual out. I'm hearing, I'm contributing, and that actually helps mitigate some of your own stress. Some of it goes back to that purpose again, where you're like, hey, this is really stressful, but there's a reason why I'm going through it. There's a reason why I'm doing this, and that helps you deal with the stress. And then not just being what I would call singularly faceted. You want to have a few different tools in your toolkit to be able to deal with it. So some of it's the job, some of it's your family, some of it's your friend, some of it's your hobbies. Some of it's just, outside interests that you have, and that helps distribute some of those things. And it just goes to being a well-rounded person. And so I know it's an easy trap for me to fall into, to be like, hey, I'm very committed in getting the mission done. I'm very committed to my family. But sometimes you got to realize, hey, I got to do things to take care of myself and make sure that I'm capable of dealing with the stress. Otherwise, I can't help anybody. And so that's a phrase or a saying that I like to pass along to my airmen. One, no airman should suffer in silence. So if you're going through something, please tell us so that way we can help you out. And two, you can't drink from an empty cup. And so if you're not full yourself, then you can't help somebody else out that may need it. And that's something that we all want to do. And it all starts with being able to recognize and help handle and mitigate some of the stress you may be going through yourself.
Thank you, General Drowley. I have a question here from Easton, who's asking, when it comes to picking subordinate leaders, what are some of the criteria, some of the qualifications that you're looking for?
Yeah, so when I look at a team dynamic, there's a few different considerations that I have. Some of it is just at the weapons school, we have a motto of being humble, approachable, and credible. I think those tenets will help you out no matter what facet you're serving in or what it is that you're going out and doing. And that's a good baseline foundation for leadership. But then also I look for things of, hey, these may be some of my strengths. Do I need somebody who's stronger in other areas to shore up some of my weak spots as a leader? Is the situation that I'm walking in call for a specific leadership style? Do I need somebody who may be more detail oriented, or do I need a generalist who can take a look at the big picture? And so I conscientiously try and make an assessment of where I feel like I may be weak or strong, and then figure out, do I need a force multiplier who's similar and can really take us strongly in one direction? Or do I need a balancer who can help make sure that I'm not missing anything in some of my blind spots? And so I would say the biggest thing that I would caution everybody against, and it's a very natural thing to do, which is to go find people that look like you, act like you, sound like you, talk like you, versus a diversity of thought, a diversity of experiences. Because again, that is what gets you to either innovative solutions or ideas and methods that you may not have considered before, or helps you cover out on the larger team to make sure that you're not missing anything. And so as I walk into any leadership situation, I try and make an assessment of what the situation I'm in right now, and then what some of those subordinate followers and team members and leaders can provide that'll help me get a good team together.
Thank you, sir. I have a question here from Paul from Detachment 805. It says first that his friend Caitlin Novotny and her family says hello.
Oh, yeah.
And then he's asking, with the introduction of GBSD, or the Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent, how will weapons school qualify, requalify, or double train new missile officers like Paul himself on the transitioning system?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, the United States Air Force Weapons School is the United States Air Force Weapons School. And I've talked about this in some other sessions where the weapons school started as kind of a Navy Top Gun, only better, fighter-centric model. And so it was really, how do fighter pilots come through the weapons school? You were the ace of the base, and then the weapons school would make you better, so that way you could go forth and instruct others. The weapons school now really covers every single functional or AFSC area when it comes down to the employment of kinetic and non-kinetic capabilities. So that means space, cyber, mobility, global strike. And right now we have an ICBM WIC that is looking at how do we transition to the GBSD, because that is the future of where our capabilities are going. And so the weapons school is going to capture that, because that's got to be how we incorporate that capability into our plans and into our portfolio to be able to deliver its effects. So the weapons school, I mean, it's the top 1% of the Air Force that make up the students, the top 0.1% of the Air Force that make up the instructors. They're already thinking about, like, how do we take this new capability, figure out how best to utilize it, and then train instructors to go forth and ensure that they've got the best tactics, techniques, and procedures to employ it. And so the team is already working on it.
Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, we only have time for one more question. I have one here from Derek, who asked, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from a failure?
Well, you know, when it comes to failure or even crisis, there's always opportunity to learn. And so I've failed a number of times where I've gone through and said, you know what, I could have done that better. Here's where I could have improved. And I think taking the time to be introspective and reflect and say, okay, what can I learn from that? Or what can I take away from that? Where now I can apply it forward. I would say that's probably the biggest failure, is if you don't learn from the mistake, or you learn from falling short, and how you can apply what it is that you've got. And so, you know, when we talk about behavioral science or leadership developments, there's the standard question: are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner? You know, do you learn through synthesis? And I'm always what's the hard learner way? Because that's what I am. It's a lot of scar tissue and hard knocks. But I can tell you that from those failures, that is what hopefully allows you to progress. And so I would say the biggest thing that I've learned to failure is to actually take a moment, assess where maybe you fell short, and go, okay, the next time I do this, here's what I'm going to do to try and improve the situation, to try and improve the outcome, to try and be better at what it is that I'm doing. And so that is what we look for. When we have, again, the weapons school that's here, they are the most challenging, robust rides ever. You're not going to win all of them. By design, you're not going to win. You are going to fail. But what we want to see is that you have the ability to take a look and go, okay, I failed. Here's where I fell short. And now this is what I'm going to do next time. And then see if you actually do that. And so from failure, that's what I've learned, is I've got to take a couple minutes to sit down and go, okay, didn't go well. What do I need to do now to keep improving?
General Drowley, thank you again for your time today. We value your perspectives, which have enriched our view of ethics and respect for human dignity. On behalf of the 2022 NCLS participants, the Cadet Wing, and the faculty and staff of the Air Force Academy, we'd like to present you with a small token of our appreciation, a plaque.
Oh, that is outstanding. I am virtually taking that plaque. I look forward to it. Again, I'm really sorry that I couldn't be out there in person. I think I do have another opportunity to come out there and talk to the Cadet Wing. I am really looking forward to it. You guys are an amazing bunch. It is an incredible opportunity. And again, I hope that you have a number of joins as you keep progressing through your cadet experience and then onto your leadership experience. I can tell you from somebody who's sat in those seats, it is an amazing an amazing journey that you're about to go on. It's going to be challenging, and there's a lot of responsibility that comes along with it. We are all depending on you, and I am looking forward to see all the incredible things that you guys go forth and do.
Thank you, General Drowley. This concludes our session. We would appreciate audience feedback at the testimonial booth on the south side of the Arnold Hall foyer. Also, at the end of your NCLS experience, we invite you to take the cumulative survey on the event app or via the link sent an email after NCLS closes. Thank you and have a great day.